yesterday. Now, the Irish Independent says sterling slide to hit hard-won jobs. The slide in sterling now threatens thousands of jobs in Ireland, with experts warning the pound will reach parity with the euro as soon as next year. And obviously there's been a lot of talk this week about Brexit, with Theresa May, the Prime Minister, saying she will, I suppose, kick everything into action by the end of March. So she will unlock that article which will effectively cause Brexit to begin. Also, the Irish Independent, Robin Schiller, reporting that the bodies of two disabled brothers lay undiscovered in their West Dublin home for a number of days. And I think really that just brings home the importance of checking up on your neighbours in this county. And, you know, even an old knock on the door, you know, the offer of going for a pint of milk to help your elderly neighbours will go an absolute long way. The Irish Daily Star also leads with that murder, daylight stab murder, and they also say in their off lead, hero Paul upset at FAI snub. Soccer legend Paul McGrath went on a rant yesterday claiming he has been snubbed by the FAI ahead of Ireland's clash with Georgia tomorrow. So all eyes on the Aviva Stadium tomorrow when Ireland have entertained Georgia in those qualifiers. Now, the Irish Times finally, private equity firm paid €3.6 million by Cleary's in the run-up to sale. They're also running with that tragic discovery of elderly brothers. And finally, the front page article by Fia Kelly and Sarah Barden says Shane Ross seeks package for pensioners in the budget. And we're going to be hearing a lot about the budget over the next few days. We might get the thoughts of Stephen Donnelly, our own TD, our own independent TD, his thoughts about the budget shortly. But Stephen is with us in the studio really to talk about an issue, Stephen, that you've been bringing up a lot in the Dáil. You're a bit of a lone voice on it, not an entirely lone voice, but it's something that hasn't really perhaps got the media's attention, and this is the issue of vulture funds. What are you raising? What's going on?
Good morning, Niall. So what I'm raising is the potential for avoided taxes to the state in the region of 10 to 20 billion euro. Now, 10 to 20 billion euro is such a big number that it's a concept more than an actual number. So what could you do? Just to give a sense of the scale of this, what you could do with 20 billion euro, what the state could do. We could reduce class sizes from 28 to 20 in primary schools for 50 years. We could build 130,000 homes. So you'd solve the housing crisis for now and for the next several decades. You could build the equivalent of 40 national children's hospitals. And the list goes on. For Wicklow, if you thought about it, kind of what's the size of Wicklow relative to the country, it would be the equivalent of Wicklow losing intentionally, for no good reason, 500 million euro in funds. Now, Wicklow County Council's budget, which does an awful lot of things in the country, is about 100 million euro. So just to try and put it into perspective, what we're talking about here is you could, with this money, you could end child poverty in Ireland. You could end child homelessness in Ireland. You could fix the healthcare system, and you could end the housing crisis. All of them together over the next number of years. So what's going on, right? Over the last few years, these so-called vulture funds came into Ireland. These are huge companies, mainly American companies, and they bought up a lot of the mortgages and commercial loans and personal loans and buildings and other property assets that NAMA had. Maybe AIB were selling some off. Maybe the Royal Bank of Scotland were selling some off. So there's a lot of people listening this morning who many of whom have been into me, who said, listen, I took out a loan, I took out my mortgage with Irish Nationwide. It got put into IBRC. IBRC then sold it to this group called Mars Capital. You know, so people's mortgages are getting sold around like sweets between these firms. Now, there's nothing wrong with banks buying and selling groups of mortgages. That happens all over the world. And in fact, for anyone listening, chances are whoever your mortgage is with, they may actually have kind of sold it on in a way, even though you still deal with the bank. The problem is these vulture funds are using a loophole in our tax laws to pay virtually no tax. And because so much stuff was sold, right? So if we look back over the last number of years, the purchase price for the stuff NAMA has sold, or by the end of this year will have sold, and the banks have sold, is about 40 to 45 billion quid. These vulture funds, they borrowed half that money and they brought in half their own money. Now, anyone who wants to go onto my website, stephendonnelly.ie, there's a detailed submission that I've put together for Michael Noonan at his request. And it has case studies about the scale of the tax avoidance. And what you find is very interesting and very worrying, which is, Niall, that the amount of avoided taxes more or less equals the total amount of money, of their own money that they brought in. Therefore, if they've spent about 20 billion quid, the potential future avoided taxes is also about 20 billion quid. So
because they're not paying corporation tax, basically, or 250 euro per annum.
They're not paying anything. They're not paying stamp duty, they're not paying VAT.
People will ask, it's 2016, how has it come until now that we have actually established this?
I think there's a few reasons, and one of them is some of the big companies. So I mentioned Mars Capital. So there's people in Wicklow whose mortgages are now owned by Mars Capital. They were Irish, and they went into Irish Nationwide in good faith. They got a mortgage from a building society. Irish Nationwide collapsed. It went into IBRC. They, critically, you'll remember I was lobbying very hard at the time for them to be able to bid on their own mortgages, and the government said no. Well, it turns out Mars Capital came in and bought them, I think, at about 28 cents in the euro. Now, what that means is that if you are sitting in Wicklow and you have a mortgage of 100 grand, Mars Capital bought your mortgage for 28 grand. But of course, they're still looking for the full 100 grand back. Now, only a few months ago, these firms started filing their accounts for 2014. So this was the first set of information we could get. And actually, I was going through it was Mars Capital's accounts I was looking at. I wasn't particularly looking for tax avoidance. I wanted to know how big a discount Mars Capital had got, because I was furious that the government wouldn't let 13,000 Irish families bid on their own mortgages. And lo and behold, as I went through their accounts, I found millions and millions, tens of millions coming in interest, tens of millions in what normally in business you'd consider profit. And then this adjustment for this thing called a loan note. And suddenly all these tens of millions were no longer in the accounts. And what you were left with is what you just said, €1,000. Taxed at 25%, and they pay 250 euros. So I said, hang on a second. I started speaking to some very good journalists around the country, Mark Paul in the Irish Times and others who've done a cracking job, and started joining the dots on this. And it turns out that this is going on. This tax avoidance is going on all over the place. So what I've put into Minister Noonan for the Finance Act is a comprehensive way of shutting it down.
But we're not going to get this money back. You're talking about what could potentially be done. We could build all these hospitals, build all these houses. You know, this money is not going to be recouped.
Well, that's the beauty of this. This money absolutely can be recouped.
How?
So take the difference between what's going on with PAC, the Public Accounts Committee this week, and Project Eagle, and what I'm talking about. The CNAG has come back to the Public Accounts Committee and said, in their opinion, NAMA undersold all of the loans in Northern Ireland by about £200 million. Now, there's no way for us to get that money back. That's gone, right? What I'm saying is the future profits can be taxed, right? So yes, we have probably lost 1 or 2 years. I'd say so far we've already lost maybe 500 million, maybe £1 billion in what I believe to be absolutely legitimate taxes. I mean, business people are getting in touch with me all over Wicklow, and when I sit down and explain it to them, and I've got a quick explainer on my Facebook page, which people seem to have thought was quite useful, they say, hang on a second. If I am sitting in Gorey or Bray or Greystones or Arklow or Blessington, and I miss a VAT payment, or I don't file my accounts, or I don't pay my employer's PRSI, they say the revenue will be in my shop, in my factory, in my office in a week, telling me that I need to pay. They said, you mean that these folks are making literally billions upon billions upon billions in profits, and they're paying no tax? The answer is yes. So, can it be changed? Yes, it can, Niall, because we're talking about future profits. And it was interesting, I put up the submission on Facebook last night, and 1 or 2 of the comments came back. They said, now look, even if you close this down, which we can, and in fairness to Minister Noonan, he said he wants to, the Vulture Funds will just sell it all off, so we lose the taxes. But the beauty of this is, it doesn't matter if they sell it off, because the principle is, if you're paying, anyone in Wicklow, if you're paying your mortgage and you're paying it into Mars Capital and they're making a healthy profit, even if Mars Capital sell it to AIB or anybody else and they're making a profit, because it's economic activity in the state, it gets taxed in the state. So it's big. The numbers are so big that when I initially came out with them, some people came back and said, look, this is fantastical. But actually it's not. The submission shows, with case studies, we've gone through all the numbers. Not only is the range genuinely 10 to 20 billion, but it's all there to be had, and it's simply now a matter of political will.
And given the context, with all the talk about the 13 billion euro that we may or may not be getting or owed by Apple, to 20 billion euro over 10 years, send me your views, 087 77 11 103. Stephen, we could talk about this for an hour, but obviously we've got time restraints. Do you think the budget next week will be a fair budget?
Well, unfortunately we don't know. One of the things that I've been looking for several years is something called equality budgeting, and what that is it provides you with the document on budget day to say, here's the changes we're thinking about making, and here's how they affect everybody. Here's how they affect men versus women, urban versus rural, low income versus high income, and so forth. And that's actually the only way to know. Now, the good news is, they've set up, and I'm on this new budget oversight committee, and next year we will have that information. So unfortunately this year we don't know if it'll be fair. I was on prime time last night making the case that the first time buyers grant is a complete waste of money. It's bad for first time buyers, and it's bad for everybody else, and it shouldn't be done. So there's going to be a few lemons in there. There's going to be some of that populist nonsense that just shouldn't go in. Hopefully there's some good stuff. Catherine Zappone has pushed very hard to get childcare in. I can tell you, as a father with 3 young kids, a point I was making last night, the banks are saying first time buyers under these new restrictions, you have to be able to save 50 billion quid as your 50,000 as your deposit for you're buying a house here in Bray, and it's 300 grand, 330 grand. Well, you need about 50,000. And the central bank was saying, well, you should be able to save that in 4.5 years. Well, not if your rent is 1,600 quid, and not if on top of that your childcare is 1,600 quid. You don't have, for the central bank, an extra 1,200 quid in savings for your mortgage in 5 years' time. So I'm hoping there'll be some good stuff on Tuesday. Childcare is critical. So, and I've huge regard for Catherine Zappone. I'm hoping she gets a win on that. And
the question, though, is politically, and look, you've been asked this question now a lot over the last number of weeks since you left the Social Democrats. Are you going to stay as an independent, or are you in talks with any other party? So
I'm not in talks with anybody. The only people I'm in talks with at the moment are people in Wicklow. So
do people want you to join a party, the likes of Fianna Fail, for example?
So there's two views. The first view, when I left the Social Democrats and I didn't go into the nitty-gritty on air, I didn't think that served anybody's interest. I was overwhelmed by the response. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails, people stopping me on the street, people coming up, some of them saying delighted, actually you never really fit in there, delighted you're away. Others saying I'm sad it didn't work. I think, we do need some freshness in politics, but absolutely accept you wouldn't have done it unless you'd any other choice. So that was the first reaction. And then in terms of what to do next, at a meeting in the hotel in Newtown on Kennedy just on Monday on this. So I've been going around the county and listening to people a lot. I'm getting two reactions. One reaction is stay as an independent for a while, but no matter how well you do as an independent, you're really a stretcher bearer in somebody else's war. Like my ambition for the country is not marginal. I want to be part of changing the direction of the country. Things like the 20 billion quid. There's so much opportunity to get things right in this country. So, yes, I can stay as an independent, or I can go into a party. If I go into a party, no matter what party I go into, some people will be very happy about that. Some people will be very disappointed. Like, if it was an easy choice, I wouldn't have set up a new party.
But you want to be a minister. You surely, every TD wants to be a minister. You surely can be no different.
Well, so for me, it's really not so much about being a minister. It's about making change. And our political system is such that it is easier to effect change from the cabinet table than not from the cabinet table. So, yes, I would like to serve as a minister, but there's some people who, they've been in politics all their lives. They're just dying to be in that photograph, and they're dying to be called minister and all that crack. I don't come from politics. I don't care about any of that stuff. The only reason I'm in politics is because I want to get things done, and I see so much opportunity, like this 20 billion in tax and lots of other things. I've actually just got agreement from Mary Mitchell O'Connor. She's Minister Jobs, Enterprise and Innovation. I've said to her, can we put together a proper review for businesses? This is something businesses in Wicklow have brought up with time and time again on the red tape and the compliance. And she said, yeah, can I work with her officials to get that piece going? Again, another huge opportunity for businesses in Wicklow around the country. So do I want to be at the cabinet table? Yes.
But let's be frank then, the speculation locally is that if you were to join a party, it would either be Fianna Fail or the Labour Party. Is that true?
Is that true? Well, to be honest, we've been talking about a lot of different options. I mean, that's a conversation, as I've said previously, that isn't one to be had on air. One thing I have learnt in 6 years in politics is that navel gazing on the air is frustrating for everybody.
But have you had any offers yet, or just even informal approaches?
No, I mean, since I left, I have been basically, to be honest, since I left, I thought I'd probably move on it a bit quicker than I have. And to be honest, Niall, I've just been really enjoying doing the job again.
And you can tell it with this issue of section.
Yeah, right.
You can tell
I was sitting in. I was only saying this to someone on the phone this morning. I was sitting in the chamber yesterday for leaders' questions, and I found myself smiling. And I probably shouldn't have been smiling because it's probably something very serious being discussed. And I said, "What is it?" And I said, "God, I was so happy to be a TD again. Like, it's, as you know this, I mean, you're in there all, it's such a privilege and an honour to get to be a TD. And it had got to a point where I just couldn't do the job I was elected to do and that I wanted to do and that I set the party up for. And it was really tough. And I've actually, to be honest, I'm just really enjoying being a public representative again at the moment. But the conversations are ongoing and I will be making a decision in a while, yeah.
Stephen Donnelly, thank you very much for coming into the studio this morning. Coming up after the break, we're going to be talking about this Garda issue and we'll also be talking fashion. Do you have what